Canada's Public Prosecution Service has issued a new directive that decrees federal prosecutors to avoid simple possession charges that don't constitute a significant threat to public safety. This directive changes the guidelines for enforcing the federal government's Controlled Substances Act. Quoting from an article in the CBC, the Director of Public Prosecutions is now asking her team of lawyers to focus on seeking charges only in the most serious of cases, and to otherwise ask for alternative measures such as restorative justice and Indigenous approaches to divert simple possession away from the criminal justice system. For example, where the possession related to substance use disorder, prosecution should generally be avoided where the offender is enrolled in a drug treatment court program or a course of treatment provided under the supervision of a health professional, said Public Prosecution Service of Canada spokesperson Natalie Huell in an email. Cases meriting charges could involve children or young people at risk, weapons, threats, acts of violence, or isolated communities, according to the new directive. This directive that moves away from punitive justice for drug users towards a more compassionate form of recovery comes after wide-ranging and diverse calls to decriminalize drugs in light of the overdose epidemic plaguing our major cities in Canada. One of those calls to action came from BC NDP Premier John Horgan, whose province has been hit particularly hard by the recent overdose crisis, recording the worst month on record this past June with 175 deaths. In his letter, the Premier wrote, quote, "Criminal prohibitions are ineffective in deterring drug use, and criminalization of drug possession directly leads to both individuals and systemic stigma and discrimination against that prevent people from seeking services," end quote. In addition to the Premier of BC and BC's Provincial Health Officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, over 50 policy groups encompassing legal, drug, and human rights groups wrote a letter this past May to the health and public safety ministers demanding that they halt these types of prosecutions in light of COVID-19. The Association of Chiefs of Police in Canada also came out last month advocating for the decriminalization of substance use to redirect resources specifically to large-scale trafficking. Those working with persons with substance abuse problems have noted that many are using drugs alone due to COVID-19, meaning there is no one to seek help in the case of an overdose. Also compounding the issue, since the shutdown of the border, the supply of illicit drugs has also grown more lethal. Avoiding simple possession prosecutions could be setting the groundwork for eventual decriminalization of drugs, which many experts argue would do more to combat use by creating pathways to find actual supportive services rather than punitive justice. There's also a racial component to those ultimately prosecuted for these types of charges that should be noted, as it continues racial injustice. Quoting from a recent article in the Vancouver Sun, the new data obtained through a Freedom of Information request shows that Black people accounted for 6.4% of drug trafficking and possession charges recommended by Vancouver Police since 2014, yet they make up only 1% of the city's population. Indigenous people faced almost 18% of drug charges, but are just 2.2% of the city's population. However, the figures show that criminal charges for simple possession of illicit drugs have dropped significantly over the last 5 years. That trend is in line with the approach of decriminalizing substance use while targeting traffickers, a position taken last month by the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, but supported for years by successive police chiefs in Vancouver. I'm glad we appear to be moving towards decriminalization. I think it's evident to most people that the current approach doesn't solve the real underlying issues that lead to substance abuse problems. Instead of criminalizing drug users who are obviously trying to self-medicate because of past trauma or the circumstances they find themselves in, we should be connecting them to actual supportive services. If instead we continue to treat the symptom of the problem, drug use, rather than the substantive underlying issues that create drug dependence, like poverty, childhood trauma, a justice system that preserves racial injustice, or the ruthlessness of inequality, we will do little more than criminalize our most vulnerable members of society. Anyway, I welcome respectful debate in the comments below, and please like and subscribe.